I found it buried under a pile of old clothes, wrapped in a faded white ribbon. My diary. Its pages smelled like forgotten perfume and tears. The moment I opened it, one photo slipped out. Me, standing in my wedding gown, eyes bright, hair like fire under the sunlight. The headline from an old newspaper clipping read, "The hottest bride in Charleston." But as I turned the pages, my smile faded. Each word bled with truths I had buried, memories I had sworn never to face again. Because behind that picture-perfect wedding day was a secret, one that burned brighter than any spotlight and darker than any shadow. People remember my smile from that day. But what they don't know is that my beauty came with a price. And that diary? It didn't just tell my story, it judged it. My name is Evelyn Carter, though back then, they called me Evie Grace. In my youth, I was the kind of woman who made whispers stop mid-air. I never asked for attention, it just found me. But beauty, I've learned, is both a blessing and a burden. I grew up in a small town where weddings were sacred and love was supposed to last forever. When I met David, everyone said we looked like a magazine couple. He was charming, ambitious, the man every girl dreamed of. When he proposed, the whole town celebrated. My wedding gown, white silk with a ruby sash, was the talk of the town. The papers called me the hottest bride in Charleston. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and I thought my life was beginning. But behind my smile was fear, a feeling I couldn't name. And that diary, the one I found years later, would remind me that even the most beautiful days can hide the ugliest truths. The entries inside weren't just memories. They were confessions. The day before my wedding was chaos wrapped in excitement. Bridesmaids fluttered around the room like butterflies, laughing, teasing, fixing my veil. I remember standing by the mirror, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. "Evie, you look unreal," my best friend Lena said, adjusting the ruby sash around my waist. "If I didn't love you, I'd hate you." I laughed, but my chest felt tight. David hadn't answered my call all morning. He said he was running last-minute errands, but a small part of me worried. He'd been distant lately, distracted. Still, when the music started the next day, I pushed every doubt away. The church doors opened, and there I was. Every eye fixed on me, camera flashes capturing what looked like perfection. But even then, I caught a glimpse of someone at the back of the church, a woman in a red dress, standing alone, eyes locked on David. When our eyes met, she smiled, slowly. Something about that smile chilled me. I convinced myself it was nothing. But now, reading those diary pages years later, I realized it wasn't nothing. It was the first sign, the moment my fairy tale started to crack. I turned the diary's brittle pages with trembling fingers. The ink was faded, but the words still cut deep. March 15th, the night before my wedding. David said he had to meet someone. He promised it was about work, but when he came back, his tie smelled like gardenias. I don't wear gardenias. I stopped reading, feeling my chest tighten. Gardenias. The same scent I remembered from that woman in the red dress. The next entry came weeks later, April 2nd. The smiles are getting harder to fake. David says I'm imagining things. He doesn't know I saw her, the same woman, leaving his office. My ring feels heavier every day. Tears blurred my vision. I could hear my younger self speaking through the words, still hopeful, still trying to believe. The diary continued. May 10th. Lena told me not to worry. She said men will be men. But I saw a letter today, tucked inside David's drawer. It was signed with her name, Vivian. She thanked him for the weekend we'll never forget. I tore it to pieces and buried it under the rose bush. Vivian, the woman in red. My breath shook as I read on. June 1st, the anniversary dinner. He brought me roses, said he loved me. But when I hugged him, I smelled gardenias again. I can't tell if I'm losing him or losing myself. Each entry became more desperate, the handwriting more uneven, a reflection of a woman trying to hold her world together while it quietly shattered. Then came the last entry, the one that changed everything. June 18th. I followed them today. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to see it for myself. They met at the old bridge. She touched his face like she owned him. He didn't stop her. He didn't even look guilty. I wanted to scream, but I just stood there. Maybe I wasn't his bride at all. Maybe I was just his prize. The ink was smudged, as if tears had fallen on the page before it dried. My hands shook as I closed the diary. I could still see the young woman I once was. Beautiful, confident, loved by everyone except the man she'd given her heart to. And then, something slipped out from between the pages, a small photograph. It was of David and Vivian, standing under the same rose arch where we'd said our vows. On the back, written in his handwriting, were 4 words: "For my real bride." The room spun, my vision blurred. All those years I'd kept that diary hidden because some part of me already knew. I had buried the pain, convinced myself it was long gone. But the truth was never gone. It had only been waiting, like the scent of gardenias that still lingered in my memory. And now, decades later, that old wound had reopened. Not to destroy me, but to set me free. Because for the first time, I wasn't the hottest bride in Charleston. I was simply the woman who survived her own fairy tale. For days, I couldn't bring myself to move the diary from the table. Every time I passed it, it felt like a mirror. Not of my face, but of the woman I used to be. The hottest bride. The town's darling. The fool who thought love alone could save her. One evening, I sat by the window as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky the same color as my old wedding sash. I took the diary in my lap and whispered, "I forgive you, Evie." Not David, not Vivian, just me. Because for years, I punished myself for believing in promises that were never mine to keep. I wore my pain like invisible jewelry, heavy, unseen, but always there. The next morning, I drove to the old rose garden behind our first home. The flowers had overgrown, wild and free. I found the spot where my younger self had written she'd buried the torn letter. My hands shook as I dug through the soil, and there it was, a corner of faded paper, edges soft with time. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I simply placed the diary beside it and whispered, "It's your turn to rest." The wind blew softly, scattering petals across the ground like tiny blessings. That night, I looked at my reflection one last time. The woman staring back wasn't the bride in the photos. She was older, wiser, her beauty now carved by resilience, not youth. And in that reflection, I saw something I hadn't in years. Peace. For the first time, I didn't need to be the hottest bride. I just needed to be Evelyn, the woman who rose from ashes of her own story and learned to love herself again. I closed the mirror, turned off the light, and smiled. Because sometimes the real glow doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from forgiving yourself for standing in it too long. We often measure our worth by the way others see us. The compliments, the attention, the applause. But none of that lasts. What remains is how gently we learn to see ourselves when no one else is looking. Evelyn's story reminds us that love built on lies will always crumble, but self-love can rebuild what betrayal destroys. Time faded her beauty, but it also gave her something rarer: clarity. She realized the diary wasn't a curse, it was her freedom written in ink. So the next time you look back on your younger self, don't judge her for what she didn't know. Thank her for surviving long enough to become who you are now. Because even the hottest bride must one day take off her gown and find the woman underneath it all.